This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Kicking off today's show is Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel with a cattle market outlook. He discusses the recent cattle on feed report and how numbers are looking for feedlots and cow-calf producers. Jane Lingenfelser, K-State Crop Performance Test Coordinator, keeps the show rolling as she breaks down grain sorghum's performance in the 2024 season. K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts ends the show discussing conservation canines and how they can help detect the spotted lanternfly. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update from Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. Derrell, thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Derrell, as we look at the cattle market, what are we seeing for cash?
Cash markets have softened a little bit the last couple of weeks. Feeder cattle as well as fed cattle. All of the markets have taken a little bit of a breather. That's after, just an outstanding January. And I think that's part of what's going on is we're seeing a little market correction. There's a number of factors playing into it, but, think of it as a correction. And so we've seen a little bit of softness in these markets.
What about for futures?
Same thing on the futures. In fact, that's part of where this is coming from. Again, we've had such a bull market in the futures. Not surprising that, the long positions would take a little break, maybe take a little profits out of the market. Combine that with a lot of uncertainty on the political, macroeconomic level, some weather issues, the Mexican border situation, all of those things, I think, kind of set the stage for the market to take a little breather and pull back just a little bit.
And you've mentioned breather correction. Any concern with that or just something that's normal in the cycle?
Well, I don't think it's a major issue. Certainly it doesn't change the market fundamentals. So the supply fundamentals are still what they are. They're longer term in nature. We're going to continue to work towards those as we go forward. But in the short run, there's lots of reasons why we could see this sort of thing. So, yeah, I'm still going to call it a correction. I think it's, it's just one of these things we're going to work through. And it's something we've talked about with producers that even though we're in a bull market and we're still very bullish on the market in general, but we're also subject to a lot of uncertainty and volatility in these markets. And I think we're seeing an example of that now. And I think it's the kind of thing that producers have to continue to do risk management and be prepared for because we can see these things. They're probably going to be relatively short-lived. And so, maybe not a major problem long term, but if you get caught in the middle of one, having to market some cattle could be a pretty serious problem for you.
Are we seeing any of that same correction when we look at box beef?
Well, that also may be part of the issue. We have seen box beef pull back a little bit over the last couple of weeks. Still at a very healthy level. I think it's still above year-ago levels. But, again, we've seen that. Now, if you look in the first few weeks of the year, across the board, wholesale cuts were generally higher for most things. The one exception has been tenderloins, which is our most expensive steak cut, has been a little bit lower, but it's also almost exclusively a restaurant item. So, it's kind of midwinter kind of a thing for that. But by and large, we've seen stronger prices there. So the current correction, again, I'm going to use that term, I think is just that. We'll see how the spring demand develops as we go forward.
Is it fair to say, though, that even though markets have maybe looked a little down recently, still very much above where we have been in past years?
Yeah, we've still been above year-ago levels, going forward, and we're continuing to see the underlying fundamentals very strong. We're going to get to cattle on feed here in a minute and talk about that as well, but just the overall situation. We had such high prices in January. We had relatively large auction volumes. Part of that, I think the prices are just pulling in as many cattle as possible. So that, kind of shows up in the supplies short term, but it doesn't mean there's more cattle out there. There's actually less cattle. And so we're going to continue to see changes in timing, but not the overall supply situation.
Did we see changes in auction volume just for last week?
I tell you, this last week was, at least in Oklahoma, was bitterly cold. We set a number of new temperature records. We had some snow and ice early in the week. And so a number of the sales were closed. If not closed, the volumes were way down. And this is the second time this year we've had some weather interruptions that have, disrupted the flow of cattle short term on a week-to-week basis through the markets. And that's also part of what's impacting this market, trying to see a market move forward with all of the sort of news and external factors out there and then deal with the winter weather on top of that has been a challenge lately.
Derrell, you mentioned that cattle on feed report, and what did we see from that when it came out on Friday?
Yeah, the January cattle on feed report showed pretty much as expected, no big surprises. Placements in the month of January were 2% above a year ago. Marketings were about 1% above a year ago. And the February 1 on feed total was about 1% below a year ago. So that's not vastly different than what we saw in January and really over the last 2 or 3 months. I think we're still going to move forward here at some point in time and see more pressure to pull those inventories down. But again, as we just mentioned, the markets have been, very attractive to pull more cattle in and change the timing a little bit, weather disruptions notwithstanding. And so we've seen, continued to see short-term supplies that more than meet the placement needs to hold us up here pretty close to year-ago levels at this point.
So no really surprises from the report?
No, I don't think so. I don't think the market will react particularly from this report. And I should mention that the February report, USDA's or NASA's report also contains a summary of all the things that happened last year, kind of confirming the numbers. But the one other thing that's in here is the annual estimate of the overall feedlot capacity. Once a year they give us this number, and it was up just slightly. We've been wavering between a capacity number of 17.1 to 17.2 million head for the last several years, and it went up from 17.1 to 17.2 for January 1 of 25. And we know that there's a couple of new feedlot operations that have been under construction and so on. So we continue to maintain a large feedlot inventory at the same time that overall cattle numbers are down, and that therein lies part of the challenge going forward for feedlots.
How does that work when we look at the cow-calf industry if feedlots continue to be at size, even if our cow-calf herds maybe aren't as large?
It's interesting. If you look over the last several years, we've seen a pretty pronounced trend where on January 1, the cattle on feed inventory will be a bigger percentage of the total cattle inventory. So more cattle are in feedlots. And if you look at, of course, we talked a lot about in the past months about extra days on feed, heavier carcass weights. These cattle are spending more time in feedlots. And so we're putting a bigger percentage of the weight of cattle in the feedlot. And that's one of the ways that we've maintained these larger feedlot inventories, even though the overall number of cattle in the country is declining. So we're kind of shifting to a more feedlot-oriented model in some sense in the industry. We're using cattle a little more intensively, and so that's a reflection of the way things have evolved. And that's not just a recent thing; that's over several years.
As many people around are spring calving cattle herds, will how calving goes really have an impact on what we could see in the market for the next few years?
That's a really interesting question, because one of the things that came out of the cattle inventory report was a bigger calving percentage than we've seen in about 20 years. And we think that's due to the fact that obviously calves are worth a lot. Prices are high. Producers have an incentive to try to have more calves to sell. And the interesting thing now in the world we're in today is that's true not only on the beef side, but also on the dairy side with these crossbred calves. And I say all that to say that, we've still got these markets. We're very bullish on them. Prices are high. So cattle producers have an incentive to try to maximize the number of calves they have for sale. Winter weather can be a challenge as we're getting into calving season now. But producers probably will put a little extra effort into trying to make sure they get those calves, that they keep them alive and keep them healthy in order to take advantage of the current market that we have.
Derrell, as we look forward for the cattle market, what are you seeing? What are you feeling?
I think we've taken a little breather here lately, but I really don't think it's any major change. I guess we have to wait and see for the next few weeks kind of what demand looks like. Maybe there's a little springtime lag here. I'm generally still very bullish, certainly for the longer term, but for the next few weeks, winter weather will be a critical factor. Some of these short-term timing issues, I know, packing plants have made some adjustments on their kill volumes to try to adjust the flow of cattle going through those systems. So we're probably in a little bit of a kind of a sideways pattern here short term. But looking ahead, we expect spring prices, broadly speaking, to be stronger as we go forward.
And Derrell, you often write articles for your Oklahoma State University Extension Cow-Calf Corner newsletter. And if people want to read some of your thoughts, how can they do that?
The best way to do it is to send me an email directly, derrell.peel@okstate.edu. We manage that email list for the Cow-Calf Corner, and I'd be happy if you just request that to put anyone that's interested on that email listserv and send that directly to you every Monday morning.
Derrell, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
You're very welcome.
That was Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. I will put his email address in today's show notes on agtoday.net if you'd like to get signed up for his Cow-Calf Corner newsletter. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Monday show talking about crop performance tests for grain sorghum with K-State Crop Performance Test Coordinator Jane Lingenfelser. Jane, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Jane, as we look at the crop performance tests, first, wanting to talk about the growing season.
2024 was a warm year. The past year in Kansas ranked as the second warmest of the last 130 years, and Kansas was not alone in this distinction. 30 states in all recorded that 2024 was the warmest or second warmest year since the National Centers for Environmental Information began keeping track in 1895. That makes 2024 the warmest year on record nationally. The average temperature for Kansas was 57.5 degrees or 3.4 degrees above normal. 10 of the 12 months averaged above normal. Only January and surprisingly July were below normal. Although July was 1 degree cooler than normal, the summer was still plenty hot, and most places in the state exceeded their average number of 90-degree days. However, there were slightly fewer days when the high temperature was at or above 100 degrees. Medicine Lodge in Barber County received the dubious award of having the most 90-degree days at 113, the most 100-degree days at 37, and the hottest reading recorded anywhere in the state of 115 degrees on August 24th. Luckily, the warm weather was accompanied by the most precipitation since 2019, and while the overall annual precipitation was still below normal, it was closer to normal than it has been for the last several years. Southwest Kansas was actually up 0.9 inches, and West Central was up 0.2 inches. Northeast Kansas was close to normal precipitation. Consequently, the state finished out the year in a better drought status than it began, according to the Drought Severity and Coverage Index, which describes the average drought conditions based on a scale of increasing severity from 0 to 4. There were no areas of the state that were D2 or worse after November of 24. So what did that mean for the Kansas grain sorghum crop? Well, the crop is fundamentally suited to handle warm temperatures, and it did appear to enjoy the slight uptick in precipitation for the year. So the overall state yield of 65 bushels per acre was 13 bushels higher than the previous year. Of course, there were issues, as usual, with stalk rots depending on the production area. Gibberella and Fusarium stalk rots occur when there are dry conditions early in the season and warm, wet weather 2 to 3 weeks after pollination, whereas charcoal rots occur when soils are dry and temperatures are high. Consequently, because of stalk rots, lodging was very common in the 2024 trials. Chinch bugs proved to be problematic for seedling sorghum development and stands in 2024, especially in the western two-thirds of the state. The weather patterns of early hot and dry weather from mid-April to mid-May is very good for drying down wheat. However, it does move chinch bugs away from that wheat and also corn and grass to the sorghum crop. Chinch bug feeding combined with drought stress will also contribute to lodging of sorghum plants. Also, sugarcane aphids continue to migrate into the state from mid-July until harvest, but according to Jeff Whitworth of Extension Entomology, no large-scale problems with sugarcane aphids were noted in 24.
What were some of the top hybrids at different testing locations for 2024?
Yeah, I'll go through the individual trials and mention 2 or 3 hybrids that did the best. The full results can be found at agronomy.ksu.edu/outreach and services/crop performance tests. And I'll start with the Northeast Dryland region. We had Manhattan in Riley County. The average overall in Manhattan was 113 bushels. That's up 17 bushels from last year. And the 2 hybrids that did the best, Dynagrow M72GB71 and Polanski 5629 did the best. We also had Belleville in Republic County. The average there was 126 bushels. Last year it was a loss. And the hybrids that did best, Cropland CP23GS68A and Pioneer 85P58 was our medium maturity check this year, did best at Belleville. Moving on to the central part of the state, Assaria in Saline County. The average at Assaria was 48 bushels. It was also a loss last year. And the hybrids that did best, Dynagrow M70GR37 and BH Genetics BH4220 did best. Back to the eastern part of the state, we had Ottawa in Franklin County. The average at Ottawa was 125 bushels. That's down about 2 bushels from last year. The hybrids that did best are early maturity check hybrid Pioneer 86P20 and also Dynagrow M60GB88 did well in Ottawa. Back to the south central part of the state, we had Hutchinson in Reno County. The average there was 118 bushels. That's also about down 2 bushels from last year. And the hybrids did the best, Dynagrow M71GR91 and Cropland CP7011A did best in Hutchinson. In the western part of the state, we had a Hayes in Ellis County. The average there was 82 bushels. That's an increase of about 56 bushels from last year. And we had several hybrids that did well, but those that did the best, Dynagrow GX24991 and our medium maturity check from Pioneer 85P58 did best at Hayes. We also had Larned in Pawnee County. The average there was 56 bushels. That was down quite a bit from last year. But as I mentioned before, that part of the state was very, very hot. But the hybrids that did best at Larned are late maturity check Pioneer 84G62 and BH Genetics BH4220 did well in Larned. We also had Colby in Thomas County. The average there was 103 bushels. That's down about 30 bushels from last year. And hybrids that did the best, Polanski 5522, Dynagrow M62GB36, and BH Genetics BH3701C did best at Colby. And finally, we had a couple irrigated trials in western Kansas. We had one in Hayes in Ellis County. The average there was 74 bushels. And the hybrids that did the best, Cropland CP23GS66A and Dynagrow M67GB87 did the best at Hayes. We also had Hutchinson in Reno County. The average there was 126 bushels. That's down about 30 bushels from last year. And the three hybrids that did the best, Dynagrow M70 GR37, our, late maturity check Pioneer 84G62, and Cropland CP 7011A did best in Hutchinson. The production factors this year, as usual, were weather-related stresses. So I would encourage producers to look at a variety of sources and years of data to find the product that fits best with their conditions and management. The individual test results can be found at agronomy.ksu.edu/outreach and services/crop performance tests. You can also find entry forms for the upcoming 2025 season on that website. For digital copies of the book, that can be found at ksre.ksu.edu/bookstore and will be available as a paper copy as an insert in High Plains Journal magazine after February 28th. And after that, it can be ordered from the KSRE bookstore or your local extension office.
And Jane, are there any other things that are happening right now related to crops they'd like to let our listeners know about?
Yes, for additional insight into all things related to crop production in Kansas, please consider the 2025 K-State Crop Talk webinar series that started February 11th. It runs from noon to 1. I believe it's on every Wednesday. Participants will be given a link to attend on Zoom or YouTube. That can be registered by visiting the K-State Northwest Research and Extension Center's website. You can also contact your local extension office or the Northwest Research and Extension office. That number is 785-462-6281. Additionally, for more information strictly about weed management, please consider the last 2 remaining weed management schools that will be held on March 11th in Kiowa and Lewis. You can register for the school in Kiowa by contacting Matt Rhodes at amrhodes@ksu.edu or by calling 620-659-3004. You can register for the Lewis class by contacting Bailey Doggett at BALEY@ksu.edu.
Jane, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Well, thanks again for having me.
That was K-State Crop Performance Test Coordinator Jane Lingenfelser. I will link the resources that she mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show talking about conservation canines for spotted lanternflies with K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts. Drew, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Drew, before we talk about conservation canines and what they can do, why are we kind of maybe a little concerned about spotted lanternflies?
Yeah, so spotted lanternflies were introduced in Pennsylvania in 2014, and they're really a rapidly expanding invasive species. They've expanded really rapidly and become quite dense to the east. They're moving a little bit more slowly to the west. The closest detection of a living spotted lanternfly was in Iowa, but eastern Kansas is definitely within the area that has a high probability of expansion. They're a hopper, and they're a sap-sucking insect, and so they target grapevines, they target trees, especially fruit trees and orchards are the area of concern if we're thinking about agricultural production, and they also will target hops. But they basically pierce the vascular tissue in a plant. They feed on the sap, and then when they excrete, there's kind of this goo that they excrete, and it's prone to growing mold or fungus, and then that interferes with light transmission that can stop photosynthesis. And in vineyards, it can be devastating. Within one growing season of the infestation starting, you can see 80 to 100% vine loss.
How does a conservation canine and what is a conservation canine play into all of this?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I want to talk about this is because conservation canines are a really cool use of dogs, and it's a new kind of a new thing in wildlife management. So if you think about like a bomb detection dog, they've been trained to smell out something that we want them to find, and we can train dogs to find things that we want them to find for wildlife research and wildlife management. So one example is a scat detection dog. That was kind of the earliest ones. You can train them to find a specific species of poop, so they can find just coyote poop, and then you can sample that for genetic material or whatever you're doing. We can also train them to find bird nests of really secretive bird species, and then we can monitor those bird nests for research. But in this study, they were actually training dogs to find these spotted lanternflies to facilitate what we call early detection and response, which is a really important method. As invasive species start to expand, we find them as quickly as possible, and then we can remove them to keep a new population from starting.
Are dogs better at this than humans?
Well, it depends on the context. So this study found a couple of different things. One, they found that in vineyards where it's easier for a person to search, that the people that they were testing were more efficient at finding the spotted lanternflies than the dogs. But in adjacent forest patches where it's harder for people to search, the dogs were 3 times more effective than the humans at finding these spotted lanternflies. And that could be a really important way to detect these new populations quickly and wipe them out before they get established.
Is there a correlation between the proximity a vineyard is to a forest and their likelihood to have a spotted lanternfly?
Yeah. So one of the things that they found in this study was that vineyards were more likely to have lanternflies than forests. So the lanternflies target the vineyards over native woodlands, but that vineyards that are closer to the woodlands are more likely to have spotted lanternflies in them than vineyards that are farther away. And so if we're thinking about establishing a new vineyard, then it can be really important to establish that vineyard as far away as we can from natural forest cover.
How do they take care of the spotted lanternfly then once they find it, or their eggs?
Sure. So once spotted lanternflies are detected, they can do a couple of different things. With the eggs, they actually can scrape them off of the stem to prevent the successful reproduction of those spotted lanternflies. But the main way that they're removing adults is through insecticides. But there is some new research emerging that shows that there's a good potential for using fungus as a biological control that will kill lanternflies and doesn't necessarily have major impacts on non-target insects.
That was K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.